What did we learn yesterday? What did we work on yesterday?
Basically did CRUD functions inside of the blog.
Yeah, so what techniques did we learn? What did we use? We did a little bit of routing. What was kind of the flow? How did you guys understand what we were working on? Anyone can chime in. Doesn't have to be all be Brian.
The sequelization of information.
The sequelization. What tool do we use to sequelize information? Actually, I gave you the answer in the question, didn't I? I just realized sequelize is there's a reason why it's called sequelize.
Right.
Sequelize is a object relational mapper. And the way that works is we give it a model, and the model is kind of telling it how to do the mapping, right? And so we are starting to get our full stack data flows going on here, right? We're realizing that, hey, they're gonna type something in the front end, and they're going to submit that form. Now we've got to get that information to the back end. Okay, now that it's in the back end and everything's lining up, how do we get that information into the database? Okay, now that it's in the database, how do we make that information show up on the home page? Okay, that's another endpoint, and we learn about our use effect and our fetch there. And then we have to do that final step, right? Which is, hey, if there's a read more button, we don't want to find all the posts in the database. We want to just find that one post that they care about. And hopefully we start to see some patterns coming up there. Sure, we may use a get instead of a post or a delete, right? But we're able to see those methods are tied to whatever we're doing in the database. And we just happen to be using Sequelize so that we don't have to write out our SQL and take all the information coming in from the form and put it in the SQL. Instead, we're able to just use an object or do that in reverse. We're able to run a query on the database, get that data out, and pass that information through to the front end. So today, we're going to take a little bit of a pause from CRUD operations, a little bit. We do have some CRUD to do, but we're going to learn how to build an authentication system. We're going to learn how to make it secure so that when a user signs in, their password is encrypted. The type of encryption we're going to be learning about is something called hashing, which is a one-way encryption technique. And we're going to watch a video on that. Then we're going to actually jump into implementing it, right? We're going to get our login screen working. We're going to talk about the user model. And now we're inching our way towards relational data. So far, we haven't had anything relational, right? We've got one table in the database. That table can't relate to anything else because there's only one table. But what we're going to be doing is learning how not only do we create our users model with the encrypted password and all of that kind of information, but we're going to learn how to do a join or a relational data association in Sequelize. The way we're going to pull that off is we're going to say, hey, when someone writes a blog post, they have to be signed in to do that. And so when they post it, we're going to know what author posted that, right? What user posted it. But we're going to want more information about that user. We're going to want their first name and their last name and, maybe their email address or something like that. So we're going to get our user authentication working tonight. And then we're going to start layering in that data into our blog posts and learning all about this thing called sessions and how we can access data inside that session. So this is kind of a love-hate class for me. If you guys can't tell, I get really excited about this class because this is when it starts to feel real, right? This is when you're like, all right, I get the login, I understand how that's working. And, that's very empowering because most apps we use today have some level of authentication on them. So I love teaching this class, but at the same time, it is one of the most technically challenging classes of the entire curriculum, right? There are a lot of little details here, and there's a lot of stuff that's got to work kind of under the hood to pull all of that off. So I like this class. I like teaching it. You're going to see me referencing code that I've already written. And so it will be a normal class in terms of following along with that, but don't be afraid to pump the brakes and say, you know what, Max, we're not even at a break yet, but I lost you, or I need a minute here, because there's just so many little pieces that it takes to pull this off. And we're going to do it securely, which means that by the end of the week, maybe even by the end of the class, you'll be able to take everything that we've done in class and apply it directly into your capstone. So keep in mind that user authentication is not a requirement on your capstone. You do not have to get user authentication working. However, user authentication is a great example of a full stack flow. We need to store the user information in the database. We need our backend to validate that they're typing in the right password and accessing the information in the database. And we need a front end in order to be able to log in or sign out or reset your password or do stuff like that. So while full stack authentication is not a requirement, what is a requirement is you have some piece, something full stack, something in the database, something in your backend that's using the database, and something on the front end that's using the backend to get to the information in the database. That can be anything that you want, but if you are like, oh my God, I have so much information, how am I going to go about doing that? Using a user authentication system can fulfill that requirement of having something full stack in the database. And it is almost going to be a one-for-one port between what we're covering in class and getting it working over in your capstone. So this is certainly an important class. Very glad that we record this, because you will probably be going back and hearing me say this again of, hey, this is a good one. If you're looking or struggling for some full stack notion in your capstone, this can be a great one to implement. Before we dive into the file setup, do we have any light bulb moments from yesterday? Do we have any questions? Did we have any snippets of the code that we want to re-review before we dive in? How are we feeling?
Not sure if you could hear me because I'm in a vehicle right now, but
You're good.
there might be a lot of background noise. I was trying to think about how I was going to implement this into my capstone. So I created the use states and I created the pieces in my page itself. So now I have to create a server page and I have to do beekeeper and create a table. So do I have to make a server.get for each thing that I have to pull out, or is there a way to actually embody what I need to pull?
So good question. On mine, it depends what you're trying to pull, right? So traditionally, for every table, you would have a different get for that. So you may have one for, for ours, we have the blog posts, but we have two different posts that are a get right now. We have one get that gets all of the blog posts, which is helpful for the homepage. And then we have another one for a post with the ID. And this is finding where the ID, we're finding just one individual post. What you may want to do is a hybrid of the two. Don't add this to your code. This is just an example. What you may end up wanting to do is saying, hey, I want to do a server.get for the food pantry where the direction is included in the path. And so you could do something like your rec and res, where instead of just finding it by the specific ID or finding all of them, you could actually modify your query to say something like pantries.findAll, where the direction is lining up with the rec.params.direction. So basically what you're doing is you're saying, hey, I'm going to go to /food_pantry/east. And then I'm going to take whatever the params are from the route and find all of the food pantries in the database where their direction, where the column is set to east. And then when I find those, I'm going to send all of them back. So there's no cut and dry answer for what you need in your backend. You may say, hey, for whatever reason, I don't want to be able to update that in the database. They're allowed to delete it. They're allowed to post a new one, but I don't want the user to be able to delete anything. That's okay. You just don't put a delete button in. You don't create your server.delete. You just, leave that endpoint off. So it's really up to you to say, hey, what information do I want in the database? What information should I be able to hit via an endpoint in my backend? And then how does that show up in the front end?
And then for my beekeeper table or my database, I should create a database with all of the endpoints that I'm putting in the get itself, just to make sure that everything is being set up.
You definitely can. And you can test all of that in Postman too, right? You can go into Postman and say, hey, I want to go food pantry/west and make sure that my data is showing up there before I go practice it in my React code.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, actually, the semicolon ID, I kind of forgot what that did. Well, the semicolon more importantly.
You mean the colon?
Two dots. Yeah, the colon.
Yeah. So we see this in two places. We see this not only in our backend, we also see it in our app.js. We have the colon ID here. That is saying, hey, the path that we're going to isn't actually going to have the letters ID in the path. Whatever gets passed in after this slash here is going to be the ID. It is a parameter in the route. So just like we have normal parameters, our parameter in the bad example, our parameter in navigate to is a slash, right? And if we have multiple parameters here, we could pass, more information in if we wanted to. We have parameters in the fetch. The first parameter is the URL. The next parameter is the options in order to control how that fetch happens. Well, the same goes for parameters in our route. We go to this route that has literally the word POST, the letters POST in it, but then whatever comes after the slash is going to be a number. It's going to be an ID. So whatever shows up in that ID is also going to be accessible from our params that are coming through use params that is coming from the router. So we can see how that works, because if we go into our use effect, we can console log out our params. So when I have my front end and back end running, notice when I click read more here, it doesn't take me to /:ID, it takes me to 3. And if I right click and inspect, I can see that console log I added in with my ID of 3. So if we wanted to, we could say, we're going to add in another route here. We're going to call it /ID, and it's also going to have an animal inside of it. Well, if we go back to our browser, we could go to /3/elephant. And what we'll see is, hey, our ID is 3 and our animal is elephant. Well, how does it know elephant is the animal? Because in the route itself, we told it not to look for the words animal. We said, hey, because there's a colon in front of it, whatever value is in here is going to get stored into this animal key. So if you look up here, we've got elephant. Now elephant is showing up in animal. The same goes for our backend. Our backend code is looking for the word post as part of the URL, as part of the path. But because we did :ID here, it isn't looking for the letters ID. It's taking whatever number is in that part of the URL and storing it in our rec.param, so we're able to reference the ID. So we could actually call this whatever we wanted. We could call this post num if we wanted to, but we would have to be consistent and call it post num in here. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Cool. Hopefully that wasn't too long of a rant.
No, you're good.
Jennifer, what's going on?
I'm looking for a reminder about the endpoint and what that definition is. We've used them. I know that we just talked about them when it came to all this project, Postman and Beekeeper, but can I just get the definition?
You sure can. Not only can you get the definition, but we're going to save some time at the end of class tonight because I feel like it's been a long time since we've done a terms list. So we'll spend some time at the end of class generating out not only the terms list, but the definitions as well. Endpoint is definitely something that you've heard a gazillion times, but I don't know that I've ever actually defined it for you guys. So our backend has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 endpoints. An endpoint is basically it's called an endpoint because it's in the back end and it's a point that we can access in the back end. So an endpoint, you can think about it as kind of a hole in a wall, right? And what we're doing is we're saying, hey, here are the different points in our back end wall that you can enter into the back end, that you can get some information out of. Those endpoints not only have a path associated with them. Hey, you've got to tell us that you're posting and you got to give us an ID as part of the route, as part of the endpoint URL, but you also need a method. And if you don't give us a method, we're going to assume that you're trying to get. And if you do give us a method, we'll use the method combined with the route in order to associate you to the right endpoint. So think of it as kind of a traffic cop that's saying, hey, you're going to the back end, you're at 3001, give me your method and give me your URL. And based off of that information, we're going to line up your request with any of the endpoints in this backend code so that when your request comes in, we know that when you say get post 1, we're going to assume that this is where you're trying to get into, as opposed to if you sent a get to get all the posts. So an endpoint is literally just a function in our code that is associated with the method and the route on the server.
Okay, that's great. And PK is what? Primary key? Okay.
And the reason why we are able to do by PK here is because in our model, we told it, hey, the ID is the primary key.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks.
Great questions.
Thank you.
And there are a ton of methods in Sequelize. If you're curious about them, Sequelize has some pretty good documentation. If you go to their Getting Started guide over here on the left, you can see there's all kinds of information about querying, about creating the different syntax for it, how you would do basic select queries, how you can get a little bit fancier and modify them as part of all the options. I'm going to be exposing you to some of them, and we're going to get actually associated, we're going to get started with associations tonight. So how we can tell it, hey, a blog post belongs to a user. And so based off of that, when we get the blog post, we'll actually be able to pull the information about the user when we are querying for that blog post in particular. If we don't get to that tonight, we most definitely will get to it tomorrow. But if you are someone who likes to read before you do anything, this associations is definitely a good read. I will post this in the live stream in case you're curious. Because, you know, I know everyone loves to read themselves to sleep with some technical documentation.
Every night.
every night. I've got the complete guide to JavaScript by my bed. You know, it's only 1,000 pages, and I just slam it down every night and just read a couple. No, I'm just kidding.
I was gonna say, you don't really do. All right.
No, but I will say that reading documentation and most certainly writing documentation are two separate skills. And remember, the difference between a skill and a talent is that a talent is something you're born with. It's not something you can do anything about, but a skill is something you can develop. And so you're going to have to write something technical at some point. Believe it or not, you can have a full-time job as a technical writer, someone who only writes documentation, someone who works with developers, understands how it works technically, and then tries to communicate that information to not only other technical users, but to non-technical users as well. So that is a full-time job title that you could do. And then the other one is reading documentation, and that's something that you just get better with over time, right? I think Caitlin will attest to not only reading documentation being very important, but being able to find said documentation is also a skill that you get better at.
Agreed. And also being able to write it when there is none.
Not that you've ever worked at a company where there is no documentation or anything.
It's definitely a skill though. The more you do it, the easier it gets, but it is kind of tricky at first.
All right. Any other questions for tonight? Got all my monitors arranged. No sharing the wrong screen tonight. Hopefully, I think I'm back in business. My desktop one is where I want it to be, so I think I'm all right. Let me take out. No, I think I'm good. Okay, gonna get started the way we always get started. I'm gonna go to Finder. I'm going to go to my desktop, to my code, to my week 20. I'm going to I'm gonna go into day 1 and my blog backend and delete my node modules. I'm gonna go to my blog front end and delete those node modules. I'm gonna right click on my day 1 and duplicate it into day 2. I'm also going to share this in the live stream, because if you are behind from yesterday's class, I highly recommend that you use my code instead of your own code. However, if you are caught up, that is totally fine. You can do that. I'm going to go into my day 2 and my blog front end and pop that open in VS Code. Also going to do that to my blog backend. I am going to open both of them in integrated terminal. I'm going to run a npm install on both of them. Then I'm going to run an npm start. Quick word of warning, if you are using my code instead of your own code, make sure you go to db.js and change the hack upstate username to your own username. It will not work because you do not have a username called hack upstate. So if you are using the zip file that I posted in the live stream, just remember to change the hack upstate username name in db.js to your own. Okay, so I did an npm install and start on my backend. I'm going to do an npm install and start on my front end. That should take us to our homepage with all of our posts. Let me make sure I didn't delete any, didn't break anything. We are good to go there. You should see your posts from the database. If you do not see your posts from the database, check your backend, make sure that it's not only running, but there are no errors. If you are stuck and do not see your blog posts, raise your hand, I will get to you. I am going to start a live share for the front end and a live share to the back end, and also post that in the Zoom chat. And I'm gonna put up a quick poll to make sure that you guys are all good to go. You need a step repeated, just let me know. Zona, what's up?
I have my code up and I tried to open it on local storage, but it did not. It's giving me this site can't be reached.
Share screen, take a look.
It won't let me share.
Try again. I'm not sharing, so it should let you in.
Yeah, it won't let me share. Error code 105035. Screen sharing has failed to start. Please try again later.
That sounds like the one Artrell's been getting for a while.
I did
Try
update it
Try checking for updates again and seeing if there is one.
to go on Zoom.
Zoom in the Zoom meeting window up in the top left by the Apple. You can click on zoom.us in the menu bar and then go down to check for updates.
Um,
5.13.7 looks to be the latest. Looks like there was an update. Artrell, what's going on?
All right, once I get the window for front end and window for back end, NPM install for both and then NPM start for both.
You got it.
All right, thank you.
And if you can, do the back end before the front end. And if you didn't and did your front end before the back end, just refresh it once the back end is up and running.
Yeah, I did NPM install on the back end before the front end. I'll do start on the back end first.
You got it. The
Thank-
order of the install doesn't matter. It's the order of the start that does.
Okay.
But not the end of the world if you did it out of order. Just remember to refresh your browser. Like most of you are good to go. Give you guys one more minute.
Our database is blog and the table is post, right?
You got it.
Yeah, mine's cleared out. That's not a problem, is it? Like nothing.
As long as you can make a new post and have it show up, then you're fine.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Zona, does Zoom still hate you?
sorry, let me just, why is this not going away now? Okay. Come on. Okay. Jeez.
There you go.
But then this won't close
What won't close?
my Zoom here. Like I click on the X to exit out, but it won't close. I'm just scared that if I like hit Command Q, then it will close this Zoom meeting instead of this page. So I'm just not gonna mess with it. Anyways, this is what I'm getting.
Okay, so something else is running on port 3000, which is why over here it's saying, hey, something else is taking 3000. So if you just hit Y on this, it will pop it open in. Come on, there you go. It will pop it open. The port on the front end isn't super important. The port on the back end is super important. So while we can just say yes and run it on another port over here, if you ever get the error that error in use, error address in use, but it's abbreviated. It's EADDRUSE. No, I'm not having a stroke. If it says error address in use, that then you have to go through and look at any other terminal windows and see if you have any other projects open. Usually it's because you have it open from yesterday, and that's what's causing the issue. But as we start working on blog and capstone and we have multiple backends, they can start conflicting. So you can actually change the listening port on here. So if you wanted your capstone to be like 3010 instead of 3001, you definitely could do that. But whenever you have a fetch in your front end, you would also have to make sure that they're all updated in there. And that can be a pain to update all of that. So if I remember, I'm actually going to jot that down. There is a trick that we can use to make it so we can put it in one place and not have to update it in a gazillion places. But we'll get to that later.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep. Anyone else need another minute? Looks like everyone has voted in here. Okay, we can dive on in. Okay, so share, put that there. So I'm going to get started with my login screen because to me, I always think about what the user is going to interact with first, right? That's how I like to build features. Now that I will say is different for every developer. Some developers say, I want to get everything done in the database. I want to get all of my data modeled out. Once all of my data is modeled out, I'm going to go in to my backend and create the models. Then I'm going to create all the endpoints. Then I'm going to go to the front end and I'm going to build out the UI. And then I'm going to make all the endpoints work together. I do that in the exact reverse order. I don't like to start with my database models because I don't really know what needs to be in that table. And once, I get there, I can build the interface. I can figure out what fields I need to store, and then I can start layering in those pieces. So just because we're doing it in a particular order in class doesn't mean that it needs to be done in that order. It does mean, however, that all of those steps need to be done at some point. So I'm going to start by saying, all right, how does the user log in? How does that happen? So I'm going to go to my home.js, and down where I've got a link to go to the post editor, I'm going to put in a little bar, and then I'm going to put in another link to my login page. And I'm going to say login. And I save that. I go back over to my browser. Now I've got my go to post editor and my little login button. That was in home.js, down line 56 on my code, just a new link tag in there. Okay, and I see that in the browser. I got my little login link here. But of course, when I click on that, it takes me to a blank page, and it tells me down in my console, there are no routes matched for location login. So before I make the route, I like to make the component or the element that's going to show up for that. So I'm going to go to new file. I'm going to create a file called login.js, and I'm going to write out everything that it takes to create a new component. And I'm going to export it.
Is this gonna go in the source file?
Yes, thank you. Very good question. Very important that it goes in the SRC, the source folder. If it does not go in that source folder, React panics because all the React code has to be inside the source folder. So make sure that when you create your login.js, when you click on this little arrow to collapse it, make sure login.js goes with it. If not, grab login.js and drag it into your SRC folder, so it's all in the right place. Very important question. Thank you, Alba. I'm going to put an H1 on there that just says login. And then I'm going to split my screen here. All the login code is going to be on the bottom half. You don't have to do that. I'm just trying to do that so you can see everything. And then I'm also going to go to my app.js file, and I'm going to add in another route for it. So I'm going to say my route is going to be a path. The path is going to go to login, and the element that's going to show up, I'm going to hope my autocomplete is working here. When I get to this point with the dropdown, instead of doing the slash and the closing arrow, I'm going to hit enter on that, because that now put my import for my login for me up at the top. If your autocomplete is not working, just make sure that you have import login from /login at the top of with all your other imports. So I'm going to finish this route out. I'm going to save. I'm going to come back over to my browser, and I see the word login, and I'm rocking and rolling and in good shape. I'm going to pause there, recap. We did SRC. We created a new file called login.js. We typed this in, so we have some placeholder. We get our export coming out of it. Then we go back into our app.js. We add an import login from that login file path. And then finally, we create our route path login with the element login. Pausing, polling, and answering Jennifer's question.
Thanks. So it can be lowercase in the root path. Can the import login be uppercase, the login part, capital L?
Yeah. So traditionally, URL paths are all lowercase. There's some debate about that, but the element has to be a capital L because it's a custom React component. If it's not a capital, it won't recognize that it's a custom component.
Okay, so element equals, it has to be capital, whatever.
Correct. Now, the file name over here in the JavaScript can be lowercase, but it is preferred to be uppercase so that you can recognize it as a component.
Nice. Okay. Thanks.
No problem.
Trying to find some consistency with my code.
And if everything works, you should, on your home screen, be able to click on the new login button and just go to the screen that says login. Get to vote in the poll if you got it working. That's how I know how to go forward. Everyone, one more minute.
So
Looks
we
like
need is to be able to, so we need is to be able to log into that login page.
yes.
And
Click
it just
login
log-
and see the
that's it?
H1, and that's enough. Yep.
What page did you import the login into?
In app.js, up at the very top, with all the other page imports, I added the import login. And then I also added the route for the login down here that's using that import.
So I'm getting that in my app.js, it can't find the login.js. It doesn't correspond with the name on the disk .source/login.js.
Do you have a capital L in your file name?
Yes, is that the problem?
No, it should be a capital L. Go ahead, share your screen. Let's take a look.
Okay.
You have a lowercase L in your import, and it needs to be a capital L on line 7.
Oh, okay, so those have to be uppercase too. Okay, so I should make a post.
Now, be careful. You've got a colon in your login instead of an L,
Thanks.
but now your post.js is lowercase as the file name. So you should probably rename that post.js over there to a capital P for consistency.
Okay, why wouldn't it let me put, there we go. So I could, okay, thanks.
So you can do capital P if you rename that one to capital P as well. You got it. And you're good to go. All right, anyone need a minute or have a question before we keep going? Yep.
So just the end result of clicking login, my screen just says everything is awesome blog. Do I actually log in?
No, it should say the word login on it as long as you have an H1 in your login.js. You muted yourself if you're talking to us.
I do have an H1 in there, but it's not showing up for some reason.
Okay, so share your screen. We're going to look for consistency. So the link to should be to log in with a lowercase L. The path in app.js should have a lowercase L in it as well. And then everything else should be a capital L. But let's go ahead and share your screen. We can take a look. Nothing wrong in your login.js. So that all looks good. Let's go to your app.js and scroll down to your login link. And you did not add the route for the login there. On my code, that is line 24 of app.js.
Thank you. My bad.
Yep. You also will need the import from line 8 of my code.
In app.js?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a good reminder, right? Of when we make a component, that's not like index.html, right? When we make a new HTML file, we can just link to it directly. But because we can use components inside other components, React lets us set up the routing, which is more control for us, but is what gives us control over, hey, which one of these components should effectively act as their own page. Artrell, what's up?
All right, I have my login, but the letters are like right next to go to post editor.
Okay.
If I wanted to like space that out, which file should I look in for that? I'm looking in the post editor, but I don't think that's the right one.
That's in home.js.
Ah, okay.
And if you look at mine, I've got some wacky syntax in there to get the spaces to show up. What I did in my home.js down with this login button is I did a space and then I did a horizontal bar, which is shift and the button under the delete key. And then I did a space, and spaces in React are a little weird. So they did it as a curly brace and a string with a space in between it. And then I've got my login link and that gave it this kind of look. but don't spend too much time on it because later tonight we're going to make sure that unless you're logged in, you cannot get to the post editor. So this
Okay.
link is actually going to disappear.
I threw a BR in there, just a line break.
Line break works. This is clearly UI is clearly not my specialty. I throw things on the page and run with it.
Quick question. The link, well, the two login, did we create anything for the login, or is that just a prop for now?
We created a component and a route for login, but this H1 is just a placeholder.
Okay.
Everyone good? All right. So the next logical thing for me, I'm going to close out my home and my app because I'm mostly done with them. And now I'm thinking about a login page. All right, what needs to go on a login page? Well, it's going to be a form. And inside that form, let's do a label. And we're going to say, hey, they need to throw their email address in there. And we're going to use a class name on that called form-label, which is built into Bootstrap. If you do not believe me, you could check out the Bootstrap documentation. We are also going to throw an input type on here of text. They support email. That's nice. Do an input type of email. And we're also going to do no, we're not. We're going to do a class name on that of form-control. And we're going to rinse and repeat. We're going to do another label. And that label is also going to have a class name of form label. And it's going to be for their password. And we'll do one more input, type equals password. And the class name is form control. So Bootstrap does some magic for us. And then finally, we are going to need a button with a type of submit because it is submitting the form for us. And it is going to have a class name of BTN and BTN primary. And that's going to say login on it. So I'm going to switch back over to my browser and I've got my email, I've got my password, and I've got my login button. Yes, it's hideous for now. Doesn't matter. We're steamrolling. We're all about that full stack. So give you a minute to catch up on the form.
The only thing we've worked on is the form. I had to step away for a moment.
Yes.
Okay.
All
And
in the login.js file.
and what is this supposed to look like after we're finished?
Just like that. Not the prettiest thing, but a functional thing. You can always go back if you're using this as a portfolio project to clean up the HTML, use some containers, that kind of stuff, add some CSS styling.
Can you
Oh,
go back
sorry.
to your code? Oh yeah, sorry.
No, you're fine. I realized I was sitting on the wrong screen. And just to flip it back, you should have your login screen, an email, a password, and the login button. All right. Team rolling. Okay. While I'm fully in support if you get in practice and getting more comfortable typing the HTML, gotta go a little bit quicker. Only because we got a lot of concepts to cover. So at this point in the program, you should feel less guilty about copying and pasting the code, especially if it's just HTML, right? When we're practicing the full stack concepts, that's certainly a time where you want to get a little bit more familiar with the syntax. But for the raw interface stuff, don't feel too guilty copying and pasting. It's not something I'd say at the beginning of the program, certainly something I'd say at the end. All right, now we've got to figure out what do we want this form to do. Well, we put a type submit on here. So we're going to say on submit, login form submitted. Okay, well, if the login form is submitted, what do we want to do? We're going to do our const login form submitted. It's going to get the event. And we know we're going to do some kind of API call in here. So I'm going to nip it in the bud and throw an async into that function. And then before I forget, I'm going to event prevent default because we want to handle the login ourselves. We don't want the browser to do something dumb and refresh the whole page and lose that information. So I throw my form submitted in there and I go, all right, I want to make sure this is working. I'm going to console log out the word submit. So I save that, I go back over to the browser, I click the login button and I see the word submit show up. If I don't, I've got something wrong with my on submit here or my function up here.
Is prevent default another built-in thing?
It is.
Okay.
Without it, you will see if I comment it out and type in A and B and hit login, well, a@a.com and hit login, it refreshes the whole page. And it's like, well, why is it doing that? It's trying to do a server call to the backend, but there's no backend that exists. And so that's why we do the prevent default in here, is because we want to put some JavaScript in ourselves that will handle the authentication.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're in here and I'm like, all right, before I even get my console log or my fetch working, I want to console log what they typed in for their email and their password. But we can't do that directly in React. What do we need to do in React in order to be able to capture the information that got typed in here?
I'm thinking of state.
You are thinking correctly. So we're going to do a const email and set email, which is going to be an equal useState. And form fields do not like to start out as null. They like to start out as an empty string. And so that's why we use the empty string in there. We're also going to do a password and a set password. And that is going to be a useState that also comes from the string. And then finally, we need to wire these up. And this is going to be a very common thing for you guys to do on your capstone, is to have to add in state so we can use those values. So we're going to set the email, and whenever we use state, we do it as a two-part thing. Not only do we need to add this on change to the input, we also need to add the value so that when someone types into it, it shows up. So we're going to do that both on our email input and also our password input. You see me copying and pasting. If I'm copying and pasting, you are totally allowed to copy and paste. So 3 new lines, or a couple new lines of code here. We added in our use states for both email and password. That gives me access to set email and set password. Then on the input, I add 2 new props. One is the on change, the other is the value. And then I do that also down here. I do my on change and my set password. That is again coming from the state up here. And we put in the value as password. If that works correctly and you've got it all wired up, in our console log, we should be able to console log out both the email and the password. And I happen to have an error down in my terminal that says use state is not defined. Remember, if we're using a use state, we also need to import use state from React. So I save, I go back to my browser, I type in a@a.com, and I type in 123, and I hit login. And down in our console, we should see a@a.com and 123. I can leave this on the screen. We did our import, we did our 2 use states up here, and then we added the on change and the value, not only for the email, but also the input for the password. And then finally, we added our console log in our login form submitted to make sure that we have access to those values.
Where did you get the on change copied from? Or did
I wrote
or
it
you wrote
here,
it down? Okay.
and then I copied it from here down to here.
Okay, just give me 1 second. Sorry.
No, I started a poll just to give everyone a chance to catch up.
Max, I can't
Yeah.
see it's next to use state because it says following Max Matthews. Use state from React, right?
Yes. I will copy and paste you. You're talking about line 4 and 5?
Line 1, import use state.
Oh, from React. You were totally right.
Okay.
And React is in quotes. A very common error that you will have in your inputs and your state syncing is that you'll have a value with no on change or an on change with no value. And what will end up happening is if you don't have your on change written correctly, when you go in here to type something, it literally, I'm typing on my keyboard and it's not doing anything. So that's when you go back to your on change and make sure that your set is working properly. Make sure you've got the event in here, make sure you've got your event target value, and make sure your value lines up with whatever you're setting. Very common issue to have what we call a controlled input. A controlled input is any input in React that has on change and value in it. In other words, React is controlling what shows up in that input. An uncontrolled input is what we had before. When we don't do the on change in the value, we allow the browser to control whatever that value is.
Where are you getting the target from? I see the value, but I don't understand where the target's coming from. For dot
So
target.
the event is like what's happening. The event is something is changing. The target is what the event is happening on, and then the value is coming from the target. And to prove that, I can actually console log out the whole event. And when I type a letter in here, you can see there's all of this information about the event. The type of the event, the target, right? The input that I typed it in on, and then other information about like, can I cancel that event from happening? But if we go into the target, you can see they're all different kinds of information about the target, and one of which is the value, and the value is what's typed into it. So the event is basically a very large object that we just bury into, just like we did for the New York Times.
Sorry, do you mind going back to your code and just scrolling down a little bit? Okay, so password. Okay. That's
Those should be the last lines. Jordan, what's up?
So mine doesn't say executing from posts as posts like yours does. Mine instead, like in my terminal, says executing default select, like a bunch of different shit.
Does it work? Can you type in two things in the email and password and hit login and see it show up in the console?
Please include an @ as in the email address.
Dumb validation.
I'm sorry, Max. I was kicked out of the Zoom twice because of my internet. You guys did the use state, and then you added an on change to the set to password and email. That's it?
Yes. On change and the value.
And the value. All right. I just need to work on that.
Sure. Jordan, are you good or do you need help?
So when I click login, nothing happens.
Okay, share screen. Pop open your console in the browser.
Okay.
Nothing is actually supposed to be happening, but in your console, there we go. It's logging out, so you're all caught up and good to go.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Not that any of you would do this, but keep in mind that we are recording the class, and so any passwords that you type in the console may show up in the recording, so don't actually use a real password.
That's not even my real email, so no one email me. Okay.
Clyde, what's going on?
It's the same problem, Max. So it's not a login is not doing anything. It's
Do you have your console open
yes.
in the browser?
Yes.
Okay, share screen.
Nothing showing. Yeah.
You are filtering by error messages in your console. If you change it to messages, it will show you everything that's inside that console. And there is what you've got typed in, so you're good to go and all caught up.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. We good to keep going? One more minute. Sure. Artrell, what's up?
I'm trying to like copy and paste to catch up. I got some errors.
Share your screen.
All right.
Come on, you don't think I would actually slow down this close to the finish line, do you?
No.
All right, let's request remote.
All right, hold on. All right, go for it.
So the first thing I notice is that this on change is the wrong color. That's because all of this on change and value should be inside the input. And you actually had it in the right spot up here. So it was just that was out of place. So now I refresh because that clears the console. I type in an email, I type in a password, I hit login, and you were all caught up. So your only mistake was this was supposed to be inside the input tag.
Okay.
everything else you were caught up on. So you're good to go.
Thank you.
I put the information in the email and password, but it's telling me my use state is not defined.
Up at the very top of the file, you need an import curly brace use state, close curly brace from quote React, close quote. Which should be line 1 of my file. Oops. Pretty confident that will fix it. So I'm going to keep going here. I've got my email, my password. I can take out that console log. Now I want to send this information to the backend. So I do my const login response equals await a fetch to my localhost 3001. And I'm going to send that to the login endpoint. But I'm going to run into an issue. I want to send the email and the password with that request. However, we know GET requests cannot contain bodies in the request. So instead, we have to use a method post. We are also going to use our headers, which are going to be our content type of application JSON. And we are also going to include our body, which is going to be a stringification of our username and our email and our password. Excuse me. And while that's going on, I'm going to try and just shuffle my screen. We added our fetch. We added our login URL. We put our method post in. We have our headers telling the backend we're sending you some JSON as the content type of the body, which we then turn into a stringification of the email and the password that is coming from the state that we hooked up. Now we can't test any of that yet because over in our backend, we haven't made our login method yet. So we're going to go do that. And when I say method, lots of synonyms. I mainly mean an endpoint there. So we do our server.post. Why is it a post? Well, because we told it was a post over here. Why did we make it a post here? Because we needed to include the body. So now that we've got the body in there, we can say server.post to our login method. And we know we're going to need to do something in the database. So we're going to get ahead of the curve and make it an async reqres. And then I'm like, well, I'm going to res.send something back. And I'm going to res.send in back logged in, true or false. I don't really know what we're going to do there yet. But we kind of run into a problem. How do we figure out if they're logged in yet or not? Well, I want to take their email and their password and look them up in the database. We don't really have a user in the database yet. So we need to go make that user in the database. With that said, is everyone caught up on the fetch over in our front end code and the login over in our back end code?
I have const login in the login.js in the front end.
Mhm.
And let's see.
In server.js, we just added lines 34 through 36 on my code.
For 34 through 36. Okay.
And that's kind of just a placeholder, right? We haven't built that method out. That method is actually, believe it or not, going to be one of the most complicated methods we've written so far. Most complicated functions or most complicated endpoints. All right, so we're going to go to our files and we're going to make a new file called user.js. And now we kind of get to an interesting spot. We can get our user set up by saying import data types.
This goes inside the DB file?
Inside the DB folder, yes. And I'm going to import my data types from Sequelize. And I am also going to do my const user is going to get the DB. And that's going to return a db.define of our user. And almost all tables always have an ID with the type of data types.integer. And it's going to have a primary key of true. And oops, it's also going to have an auto increment of true. Now, this gets to an interesting spot, and I know you guys are at a point with your ERDs where you're like, I don't really know if this ERD is right, or how do I take the capstone data and get it into my database? What I find to be really helpful for that is making a spreadsheet. So go take the information in your capstone and try and put it in a spreadsheet. Figure out, hey, what table does this go in? Is this a column or is this another row that I'm adding? So we're going to practice that exercise right before break. You don't have to follow along with me on this, but I'm just going to do this as a little example. So what do we already have in our database? Again, you don't have to follow along with this. I know my first table that I have is called post. And my post has a couple of pieces of information on it. It has an ID, it has a title, it has a tagline, and it has the content. Okay, so let's load up an example. And I do this first blog post. Wow. Such amazing. And my next one is going to be second with a tagline of not so wow. And my content of kind of okay. But we run into something interesting here. We also have our user table. So we have to start thinking about, all right, that's a separate table. And why does it need to be a separate table? Because there's a one-to-many relationship. One user could write many blog posts. So we say, all right, what do we put in our user table? Well, most tables have an ID. And now we figure out, all right, what other information do we need to know about the user? Well, we need to know their email address because that's how they're going to sign in. And we also need to know their password. So I'm going to say, hey, we've got two users, 1 and 2. And we're going to make up email addresses. And we're going to say the password, the most secure password ever, and the second most secure password ever. Actually, believe it or not, this is one of the top 10 most widely reused passwords, just to make you feel really secure. Hopefully that's not behind our nuclear launch system. Okay, so we've got this information in here, but we're missing one more piece of information. I want to know what user wrote what blog post. Well, we already said this is a one-to-many relationship. One user can write many blog posts. So what we're going to do is we're going to add one more column in here to the post table called user ID. Now, if I put 1 and 2 on this, how do you know that the first blog post was written by me? You know it's written by me because my user ID here, which is a primary key, is used as a foreign key in the post table. So if you are struggling to model out your ERD, if you don't really know what data field should go in your database, just make a couple tables, right? This isn't anything super complicated, but it makes it a little bit easier to say, okay, should I have 5 columns going across the top with hospital ID 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? Well, what happens if I want a 6th hospital? I don't want to keep adding columns to that. So how can I modify my table and actually use dummy data, right? Because having that data in here makes it easier to understand, oh, what I need to do is add that information as another row. Or how does this ID relate to the post table? Well, there's no way it can relate unless we add another column. When we add in that other column, now it's clear to see that this user ID here corresponds with this user ID over here, and it allows us to put things in here and reuse that information. Okay, so how do we know the third post is by user ID 1? Because user ID 1 lines up with the ID primary key in this user table, and because of that, we know who wrote this information. So while we're in here, I'm going to just add in one more column, just so we have some data we can play with.
While you're doing that, I have a hypothetical question, if you don't mind.
Sure, go for it.
So in the case of if we want someone to sign in with just one email, would we make the email the primary key? Or would we?
Hold that question.
Okay.
No, you wouldn't. You can use something called unique true, but we're actually going to control for that situation in the code that we write tonight.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Sorry.
Save that question for Thursday. If you don't have an answer by Thursday, re-ask it. We aren't actually going to create account flow, but we are going to make something that code will hopefully answer your question. So totally good question, just one that we haven't gotten to yet. Schneider, what's up?
The first table, there's no need for a primary key on that table for post.
This ID is a primary key. I just didn't label it.
Oh, okay. I was getting confused. Okay. Yeah, labels out.
Yeah. Okay. So we go back to our user table, and now that we've kind of planned everything out here, it's a little bit easier to know what these fields are. So we're going to say, hey, the email is going to be a data type of string, because emails are not going to be longer than 255 characters. The password is also going to be a data type of string, because I hope to God your password is not 255 characters. And finally, we're going to put first name in, which is also going to be a string.
And this is all under the table of user?
Yes,
Okay.
the table and the model or the entity, all meaning the same things there. The model is our JavaScript code to model what the table should look like.
Why are we only putting first name? Are we not adding last name, or is this just for?
If you wanted a last name, you could. Just for the sake of having some data that we can associate with each other, I did first name. It is in general a good idea to split out your first name and your last name in the database. But I will save you the rant of how important it is to split out data, especially for something like address. And while you guys are catching up on that, zip code should always be a string. And I know that because my zip code growing up was 08226. And if you put it in as an integer, it will think your zip code is 8226, not 08226. So whenever you are storing zip codes, make sure to always make them a string so they'll support the leading 0. Not that I've spent hours debugging that issue or anything.
Canadian zip codes can have letters too.
And UK postal codes can have letters as well.
Strings are just better sometimes.
Okay, so we got all of that in there. We are 3 minutes away from break, but when we go into our Beekeeper and connect to our local DB and go into the blog, I have my posts in here, and no matter how many times I hit this refresh button, I don't see my users in here. Why not?
I feel like we didn't connect it somewhere.
You are totally right. We made our user, and it's its own little file hanging out over here, but we've got to tell db.js, hey, import the user model from /user.js, and then also make the user have access to the user model database. And finally, add in your user down in the export. So 3 lines modified there. We imported our user model. We said const user equals user model. And finally, we added the user as part of the export. And if you do all of that right, you'll have a nice data crash down at the bottom that says the requested module user.js does not provide an export mean default. That is because in my user.js, I forgot to export the default user. In other words, our app was crashing because our import couldn't find the export in this file. So I add my export default user, and then over in db.js, I have my import. I've got my user model, which gives it access to the database. And then finally, I export it out down at the bottom.
Quick question. Is the export default what allows you to export it as user, but import it as user model?
It is.
Okay.
Could you explain that a bit more? Like, wouldn't it work either way? Like, what are you not importing the first time, I guess?
Well, if I could bring up why I brought up the question is because normally when you export something or reference something in one page, if you're importing that thing, you should reference it the way that you referenced it originally. So like if you're exporting user, I would expect to import user, but, and Max can go into this. I know there's something about the default that allows you to kind of rename it different ways. Like it knows, because I think it's because it's the only thing being exported from user.js, you could pretty much call it whatever. Is that what, do I have that right? Because there's only one thing
so
being exported, or
you can export. So if I left this off and I said, instead, don't follow me on this, but if I said export user, I could also export something else here that's like string equals 1, 2, 3. Well, now I'm exporting two different things from this file. So what I need to do, because they are not a default export in my db.js, I would have to import that with these curly braces. Those curly braces would allow me to get access to the user and the string. So I could say import user and str, and now I have access to both of them. However, when we do a default export, that is what will come outside of these curly braces. So if I, instead of doing export const user, I instead say const user and do an export default user, when we're in here, we can get access to that by just moving it outside the curly braces. And we can actually call this whatever we want. So inside here, they need to line up with whatever the name is that's getting exported from here. But because we're doing a default export, we are able to call that whatever we want out here, like user model. So if I call this str1, it would yell at me because str1 is not exported. But because it's the default export outside of the curly braces, we're able to call it whatever we want.
that definitely answers the kind of the deeper part of what I was wondering. Thank you.
Yeah, importing and exporting is one of those things that like you just do it because the documentation tells you to do it. And then all of a sudden you have a light bulb moment where you're like, oh, there is actually value in import in export defaults and understanding how the curly braces fall. But that's like 300 level JavaScript. So if that went over your head, don't worry about it. Just read your documentation and that will tell you how to do it. Or use example code. All right. Now we're a couple minutes over break. If you notice in our terminal, we've got a bunch of different SQL in there. And somewhere in there, we have, if I can even find it, an insert statement or a create table statement. Let's see if I can find it. Create table. So in our terminal, it says create table if not exists users and our password and our first name and all of that stuff. Well, that's sequelizing our model. And if we go back over to Beekeeper and hit the refresh button, if you have to hover over entities, put your mouse over entities, then hit that refresh button as if we didn't have enough of them. Now we've got our users table with our ID, our email, our password, and all of our data set up in our table and ready to go with some information. If you don't, check to make sure you've got your import user model, you've got your const user, you have your user being exported. All of that is in db.js. And also make sure in your user.js, you've got export default user down at the bottom of it.
I have all of that and I still don't.
And you click the refresh button on entities.
Yes. Oh, under. Yes, I'm not getting the user
Share screen.
folder. So I'm just getting the posts.
Take out your import data type. I don't think that's the issue, but you've got two imports at the top of that, and you should only have the second data types.
Oh.
and throw an S. Data types is the one. Yeah. Okay, cool. And then save. And do you have your backend running in your terminal?
I did.
I don't see it. So,
NPM install.
hold on. Let me request. That's your debug console. Let me just see if it's hiding in terminal. It is. And it was mad because you had data type instead of data types. So now if we scroll down to the bottom, everything's fine and you don't have any errors. And if we switch over to Beekeeper and refresh,
Oh,
there are your
user.
users.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Brandon. If you have it working, go on break. We'll be back at 7:30-ish.
I'm having the same issue that Exona was having, but need to hold on, arrange my screen a bit.
Backend. User, everything looks good there. Switch me to your db.js. User. I'm coming in. Let me just look at your server to make sure your database, yeah, everything looks good there. And I'm gonna just restart your server for good measure. I don't like that it's not saying server running on port 3001. So I think there's a bigger issue here. Oh, okay. Sorry. The screen error just lagged there. Import DB from db.js. Why is it not? I've got a really bad feeling. Let's try this. Oh, crap. Oh, you know what? I didn't save this file, but I don't think that's the problem. It's really not having your. Oh, is it that's weird. It's working with Node. Why isn't it working with NodeMon? NodeMon server JS. You done broke your NodeMon.
Love that.
What? How'd you do that?
Your guess is as good as mine.
I is confuzzled. Can I npx reinstall? Okay, let's try and RM RF node modules, and then npm install them again, and then npm start it. Ha! Beekeeper fresh, you're good to go.
Okay, cool. Wait, what happened though?
Something got screwed up in your node modules. Maybe like your internet dropped when they were installing or something weird. So I just deleted this folder and reran npm install, and that like reinstalled everything and made it start working again.
Awesome. Well, thank you. 'Cause
Welcome to the
that
world
was-
of backend. We don't really know what happens in DevOps, but you know.
It's working now.
Kalai, what's up?
I think it's the same problem, Max. I'm not seeing the username in the
Share your
beekeeper.
screen. Let's take a look.
Yeah.
Let me request remote.
Okay, give me a second. I have to find where is the approved.
What?
I'm just trying to find out where is my cursor. So
Oh, gotcha.
I gave it.
Okay, so user, everything looks good there. Let me take a look in your terminal. If we go all the way down to the bottom, there is a database problem because you're using the username hackup state. So in db.js, we just have to update that to your name.
I know, right? You told that in the beginning. I did it. Then again, I kind of recopied again and I forgot to change it. So
No problem. You're good to go.
thank you much. Yeah, thank you.
Everyone else good?
Yep.
What's up, Schneider?
So, so I'm gonna share my screen. I'm not sure if it's well, it's telling me something about I don't have the right stuff imported, but I got the right stuff imported, so I don't know what they want from me, or what it wants from me. It's telling me can't find a module imported from, but I have. Well, I tried this. This isn't
Singular there. User.
Yep.
Oh wait, you've got an. So hold on. I'm gonna make yours look like mine. Because when I made my file, I called it user.js. Come on, you can do it, screen share. Thank you. Rename. This I have singular.
Oh, so no S.
No S. And then let me look in here, singular. And then db.js, singular. And then server singular. So if we save and scroll all the way down to the bottom, you've got a database problem because you turds don't listen to me and don't change the username.
Oops. No, that's not my thing. Mine's work time, but I put from here. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Work time.
Save, scroll down in the terminal, make sure it's all the way, no errors at the bottom. You're good to go. Switch over to Beekeeper, hit the right refresh button, and you should be good to go.
Lit. Thank you.
Yep. Artrell.
All right, I saw an error and I think I fixed it. It was under what was it? Under user, and line one was an import. I had data type, comma data types. So I got rid of the data type, and the node terminal said everything was up to date. But when I go to Beekeeper and hit refresh, nothing really happens.
Screen, let's take a look.
Okay. It's possible I haven't been inputting any data. Which could possibly be
Request
it.
remote.
Okay.
You should be able to see the table without having any data in it.
Okay.
So let me just check over here. Okay, it's definitely not there.
That's the code. Go to the very bottom, to the right. That's the bottom. Keep going, and then all the way to the right.
Got it.
That one. Yeah.
All right, user, DB, user model. Then we got to use the user model.
I still messed up.
One line away. And then once we use the user model, we also need to export it down here so that we can use it in other files. Now, when we save and head to Beekeeper and refresh, you've got your users and you're good to go.
You know, I was about to go and break all confidence. I fixed that one error. I said, let me just make sure. Glad
You're
I did.
close.
All right, what time we get back, Max?
Give me 20 minutes. So 7:45, and I will is that right?
7:35.
7:35. I'll
All right.
post that in chat as well. Going. Okay, so close out of that. Okay, so we've got our user model created, and we're over in Beekeeper, and we see our users in here. And if we double click on it, it says no data. Of course, there's not any data. The server hasn't. We haven't inserted any users yet. Now, normally you would have a different user interface flow for creating a user account, but we're going to create a user manually. We're going to go through and we're going to say, instead of adding it directly in Beekeeper, we're going to add it in our code. So I'm going to go to my server.js, and I'm going to say down towards the bottom, const server started is going to be an async function. And we're immediately going to call server started. And what we're going to do is we're going to import all the way up at the top at our db.js. We're going to import our user model so that we have access to the users from the database. And what we're going to do is we are going to say in our server started, const user equals user dot find one, got the await a find one where the email address is my email. You can do whatever email that you want in there. And it is immediately crashing because did something wrong. Let me look in my db.js user model for default user. Maybe that was an old crash. I think that was an old crash. Okay, let me keep going here. What we're going to do is we're going to say if there is not a user, in other words, go to the database and try and look for a user with the email max@zane.tech. And if that user does not exist, then user.create. And what do I want to create? I want to make the email max@zane.tech. Now make sure your email address here lines up with whatever email address that you're using down here. And I'm also going to include the first name. And I'm also going to include my super secret password. So we needed access to the await keyword. So we made an async function. We call that server started, and we call that function. Then we say, hey, go to the user model, go to the user in the database, and find a user where the email is max@zane.tech and store that in the user. Now, if there is not that user does not exist in the database, create the user with the same email that we're finding them based off of, the first name and their password. Now, if we did not do that step, if we didn't check here, every time the server restarted, whenever we modified our backend code and restarted the server, it would create another user account for me. So this is the process called seeding the database, SEEDING. When you seed the database, you are basically planting the first pieces of the data that you need for that database to work for you. So I'm seeding in my first username, my first user here, so that we can test it and make sure it's all working. If I go back over to my Beekeeper and hit the refresh button, you should see my account is in here.
I'm not sure you said it, but what's the exclamation by user doing in that if?
It's saying if there's not a user. The exclamation point is saying if it's not a user. It would this is the equivalent of saying if user equals null or user equals false. It's kind of the exclamation point is a shorthand for that to say if there's not a user.
Excuse me, Max.
Mhm.
Just want to make sure I put this in the right spot. So in server, we
Mhm.
added the server started.
Yep.
And that was the only thing we added to that one.
Correct.
Right? And then in users, I don't remember if we had made any changes just now. I don't see any.
Nope. As long as you got the export default user down at the bottom, the only thing we added is lines 38 to 48 in server.
Okay.
And if you go to Beekeeper,
Added user,
what's that?
did we add the user up top?
Oh, you're right. We did add user to the imports on line 3. And if everything is working, you should be able to go back to Beekeeper. And if you have the users table open, use the refresh button. If you don't have it open, just double click on it on the left sidebar, and you should see your user account created in there.
I'm just not getting it to refresh. Maybe it's because I have that annoying message. How do I make it?
The refresh for the table is down in the bottom right.
Oh yeah, thank you.
There are only 9 refresh buttons. I don't know why that would be confusing.
So just think of it as dummy data that we inputted in there.
Yep, you can think of it as dummy data or starter data. That's what seeding the database is. It's just starter data. It's not always necessarily, excuse me, dummy data, but it could be.
Why won't my
Success.
no?
Okay, share your screen, and then Jordan, I'll come to you next.
I just don't know why my user table won't show up. So
Double click on users over on the left. Okay, so it exists, but the data is not in there. So let's go to your backend code. And here's the problem. Your auto import ran, but it imported from db user.js. We don't want it from the user.js. We actually want it from the db file right here. So if I take that out.
Okay.
And I'm also just going to take a quick peek here. Server started. The other problem that you have is you made this lovely function called server started, but
yeah,
You didn't call it.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
And we've got one more issue. This should be in quotes because it's a string.
Ooh. Okay, thanks for finding what I missed.
Let's confirm that though. Let's go back to Beekeeper before I give you back your computer and refresh, and you're good to go.
Awesome. Okay.
Jordan, what's up?
So I copy and pasted somewhere along the way and effed something up because I was following along fine, but then once I did that, I don't know what happened.
Share your screen.
Okay. Come on. Why can't I? Oh,
And I'll say while he's doing that, that same thing that happened to Jen with the auto import happened to me with the importing it from the wrong file. So I just say in general, like everyone should kind of look out for that. Just even going forward, anytime you like, it might auto import from the wrong file. So if you're having issues, that's a good place to look.
Very good point.
Thank you. I was like, I don't remember typing that in.
Yeah, that import, I'm just going to make a point of that. When you import the models, make sure that you're importing the model from the db.js file. The reason why we have to do this, just reiterating on Brian's point here, is that we can't use the user.js directly. What we need to do is use the user coming out of the database file, because that is what is giving it access to the database itself. Sequelize is a little weird in how it initializes its models. So TLDR, when you import a model, make sure it's coming from db.js, not db/ and then whatever the name of the model is. However, that is not your problem, Jordan. Your problem is the eternal problem that role hack upstate does not exist.
oh, that's been a heck. Right. It's Postgres.
And now you've got a different problem that users does not exist. And let me see. That may be part of a bigger problem that we need to fix at another point. Yes, it is. Okay. Refresh, you've got your users, and in your users, you've got your created account, so you're good to go.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else have questions or need another minute before we keep going here? Okay. So we've got our data in here, and we could keep going, right? Because now that we've got a user account created here, we could keep building our login endpoint, right? We can start using this find one. We can start seeing if they're user accounts. We can start seeing if their password is correct. But does anyone see a problem in what we've done so far?
We've just set it to one specific user. We haven't set it.
We have, and that's sometimes okay, right? Sometimes when we build applications, we say, you know what, I only want a couple people to be able to access and create accounts. So sometimes we do hard code. Hard coding is just typing in the values directly into our code. And for this blog application, that's going to be all right. We're not going to go through a whole create account process because I don't want anyone to be able to create an account. I only want the one user account to exist. But do you see anything wrong with that particular user account?
I mean, in my opinion, I feel like security risk. Why do I see their
What
password?
is that security risk? You are totally right.
Yeah, their password. I was gonna ask that
The
earlier.
password, we're just storing in plain text here. That means that anyone who stumbles onto our database can see our password. And not only would they be able to see this password, they would be able to see the password of every single person who has created an account in our database. Major, major security risk there. So there are 3 ways we can actually store a password, and I'm not going to be the best one to explain that to you. Instead, we are going to watch a lovely YouTube video on password hashing. And you think I would have thought ahead and pulled this up during the break, but that would have required some forethought that I didn't have.
Really excited for today. This is the day that
So what did we get from that?
Wow.
Was that like intro to cybersecurity, I guess? Like what was
The
that?
name of that video was Password and Hash Functions, Simply Explained. So what did we learn from hashing? What is the main difference? I think that the most important thing to learn from that. What's the main difference between encryption and hashing?
Security?
So,
I was just gonna say, the main difference, it seems like there's no plain text. With encryption, there's still some way to get to the plain text.
Yes, let's elaborate on that a little bit more. Encryption is usually 2 ways. Hashing is technically a type of encryption. But encryption, the way encryption usually works is it's a 2-way process. I'm going to take my password 123 and I'm going to use this security key to encode it. And if I don't have that security key, if I don't have the key that's going to unencrypt or decrypt the information, that information is safe. But if I do have that key, not only can I decrypt that password, I can decrypt all of the passwords in my database. There is a time and a place for encryption. In fact, we use encryption on every HTTPS website. We use that on every iMessage that gets sent. Hey, I'm going to encrypt this information and I'm going to give you this key separately. And once you get the key, when I send you messages in the future, you can use that key to decrypt my message. And that all happens behind the scenes in iMessage, in emails, in HTTPS, all kinds of things using encryption. But we want something even more secure. We want to take your password and we want to take your security password and we're going to turn that into a hash. That hash is a long line of letters and numbers. Won't make any sense to us. But the interesting thing about that hash is there's no way, no matter what information you have, unless the hashing function, the hashing algorithm gets cracked, there's no way to take that hash and turn it back in to the user's password. If that's the case, how do we use that hash? Hashing is 2 things. Not only is it one way in that it will, there's no way to unencrypt or decrypt that password, it also has to meet a second requirement that no matter, that when you take the input and rehash that input, the output will always be the same. So no matter how many times I hash out the word purity, the resulting hash is always going to be the same. What that means is that when the user enters in their password to log in for a second time, I take whatever they typed in, I hash what they typed in, and if what that hash output is matches the hash I stored in the database, I now know that that is the correct user. So hashing is kind of interesting in that we can only do it one way, but hashing also requires that whenever the inputted password is hashed, the output will always be the same as the hash that exists in the database. Salting gets a little bit more complex there. Cost gets a little bit more complex there. We don't need to do a deep dive on that. If you were interested, go check out the certificate programs at Erie 21 because they're going to go way deeper into cybersecurity. We are just scratching the surface here of, hey, we're going to encrypt our password so that it's stored in the database. And then starting tomorrow, we're going to figure out how do we integrate, how do we build out our login function to use those password hashes. With all of that said, does anyone have questions before we dive back into the code? If you do, if you are interested in this stuff, I have in today's outline a bcrypt deep dive. And if you pop this open, it not only does a hashing in action understanding bcrypt, which is the name of the algorithm and the package that we'll be using to do our password hashing, but you can see this is quite a long article that goes through all the different types of hashes. It's going to have our example code that we're going to be using here and a couple excuse me, I was not quick on the mute button there. A couple other pieces about how it all works under the hood. Any questions on that? Okay, let's put it in use. So I'm going to go back to my code, and I can't remember what we npm installed at the beginning of this project, and that's pretty common. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pack open our package.json, and you can see I already have bcrypt in here as a dependency. So that is already installed, which means we can go ahead and use it. If in your package.json you do not have a bcrypt showing up here, you can go down to your terminal and hit Control-C. Then you can do your npm install bcrypt. And as soon as that is done, you can do your npm start again so that the server restarts. One second.
Max, just a heads up, it doesn't look like the week 20 outline has been posted yet.
Caitlin, can you do that for me? Thank you. You can do all of them for this week as well.
Also week 19.
Got
And
it.
week 19 as well. The way you can get around that is everything's linked in the schedule. So if you go to the schedule link up at the top, everything's linked in here, but we'll get them published in Canvas as well. Okay, so in our code, now that we've got bcrypt installed in our dependencies, we can close out package.json.
That didn't work for me. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no. That's fine.
I did Control-C.
Yep.
And then hold on, Control-C. And it's
Are you in
not,
the terminal, in the backend terminal?
yeah,
Share your screen.
I don't know what's going on. Okay. So I did Control-C.
I don't know what's bringing that up, but you can just do your npm install bcrypt.
Yeah.
CR, yeah, yeah, you got it. That's right.
Should we go with the outlines now?
Cool, thank you. Okay, and then npm start, and you should be good to go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Anyone else need help with bcrypt? Okay. So we created our user in here using this password QWERTY, but that's not particularly secure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the top of the file because all of our imports should always be clustered at the top. And I'm going to import bcrypt from bcrypt. And then once I've got it imported up here, I'm going to go down to my create user. And I'm going to say, I am going to say bcrypt. I would like to hash a password. And we're going to do it synchronously. We want bcrypt to wait until the hashing is done before we move on with anything. And once it is done, we can say, hey, bcrypt needs a couple pieces of information. And this is where these pop-ups become really helpful. Normally they're in the way and you can't read what I'm typing. This is actually helping us out. It's saying, hey, the data of the string, what needs to be encrypted? Then it needs to know how many rounds of salt is it going to do. Salt is that random piece of information that gets added on to the end of the hash to make it so that your hashed password doesn't match up someone else's hashed password. That's Rainbow Tables, deep dive on cryptography. You don't need to go there. What we're going to do is I'm going to say, hey, my super secret password is security, and we are going to hash it, or we're going to salt it 10 times around. 10 seems to be the default. Deep dive into salting and goes over my head once we get past the basic hashing that happens there. So I'm going to save. I'm going to go back into my beekeeper. And when I refresh my beekeeper over here, you can see my password is still the same. Well, that's annoying. Where's my hashed password? Well, we got to keep in mind the server started and it said, go find if the user exists. The user does exist. My user account is already created. So it's not going through and creating the new user with the hashing that's happening. No problem. We can fix that pretty easy. I'm going to right click in Beekeeper and delete out my user account. Now, keep in mind that does not actually delete it until you come down to the bottom here and you hit this apply button. Once you hit apply, now it's actually gone. So I'm going to go back to my terminal. I'm going to hit Control C to stop the server. We're going to stop in 1 second, Jennifer. And up enter to restart it. When we go back to Beekeeper and hit refresh, you will now see my password sitting in here is an encrypted password. Got your encrypted password, you're good to go. Jennifer, where did I lose you? Oh.
I didn't see what was supposed to be deleted in Beekeeper.
Oh, okay. In Beekeeper, in the users table, you should have one row in that table with your user account.
Mm-hmm.
Right click on that row and go down to delete.
Oh, on that row. Okay. I thought
once
people was like freaked out. I'm like, no.
And then you got an apply button down at the bottom. Don't forget to hit apply.
Mm-hmm.
And then in your terminal, Control C to stop it and up enter to restart it.
Well, let's see if it lets me see everything. So Control C.
Yep. Make sure you're clicked into your terminal area.
Up enter. Okay.
And then go back to Beekeeper and use the bottom right refresh button, and you should see your password in there is now encrypted.
Mm-hmm.
Good to go. Anyone else need help on that? Does anyone else not have their encrypted password visible in Beekeeper? Jordan, what's up?
Mine is crashing too. When I just deleted that in Beekeeper and then stopped and restarted it, it just crashed.
Sure, sir. Share your screen. Okay, so you're missing some code. In the bcrypt hash sync, it needs 2 pieces of information. It needs to know what password it's hashing. And it also needs to know how many rounds of salt it's going to use. We use 10 by default there. So now when we go back to Beekeeper and refresh, you have your encrypted password and you're good to go.
Cool, thank you.
Anyone else need help? Go back to sharing my screen on the code. And in Beekeeper, as long as you can see the password in here, you're good to go. Cool. All right. I promised you guys we were going to stop a couple minutes early and switch over to terms tonight. So I think you guys are coming to appreciate what it takes to be a full stack developer, right? Now we're seeing, hey, this login system, we set out 3 hours ago to start doing a login, and we had to build the user interface. We had to learn about password hashing. We had to get our model set up. We had to seed the database, and we still haven't even gotten our login to work. All we've done is made the user interface in the front end, sent that information to the back end, and created our user model that's now encrypting and storing that secure password. So tomorrow we pick up exactly where we left off. We're going to go to that login endpoint, and we're going to use the hashing to figure out, hey, is the username or the email and the password they're giving us match what's in the database? If it is, go tell the front end that they're allowed to sign in. If it's not, we need to handle that a little differently. We're also going to learn about middleware and how we can secure an endpoint to make sure that when the user makes a new post, that only a signed in user can do that. So that's what's coming down the pipeline tomorrow and Thursday. In the meantime, we're going to switch over to tonight's outline because we haven't done terms in probably 2 weeks, and I want to have a chance to capture all of those. So let me switch over to that and go ahead and fire them off whenever you are ready.
So is this terms from like 2 weeks ago till now, or just for today?
Sure.
Okay. We'll start with the basics. Database.
A persistent storage location classified into 2 types: relational SQL and non-relational data is structured in a way that makes it easy to perform all 4 CRUD actions. If anyone disagrees with one of my definitions or wants to add to it, definitely let me know. Apply throughout endpoint. It is a specific route in our backend code that route or path, I'm going to put in parentheses here, specific route paired with a method that allows our front end to make a request to the back end to run a function.
Daddy.
ERD, entity relationship diagram, used to map out our database. Sometimes it's more helpful to make dummy data spreadsheets than to create the ERD to figure out how the data relates and what columns should be in the tables.
Express and node.
Express and node. A node framework that makes it easier to build RESTful APIs. REST is representative state transfer. It is the dominant way that we create APIs. Express is just a quick way to build a API. Express is what has our .get, our .post, our .listen, all of that information, .use built into it. Node is a JavaScript server that runs in the backend, and is the biggest oversimplification of Node I think I've ever seen. Cores, and then I'm going to group these under sequelize functions. And we've got find by PK, find one, create, destroy. And I'm going to just define this one first. Methods or functions built, it's not or, I guess that's kind of synonymous, built into sequelize that convert a JavaScript function or command into SQL that executes in our database. And cores, cross-origin resource sharing, allows our backend to respond to requests from a different origin, and that's going to say port or URL.
React DOM and
Sure.
use params if you can, sir.
Yeah. React is a front-end JavaScript framework that makes it easier to build web applications with dynamic or interactive data. Some common concepts include reusable components, props, state, router. I feel like that's a good starting point. Use params, a function built into React Router that allows us to access information in the route params of the URL. And React DOM instead of the browser controlling the document object model, it allows React does it instead, which allows for more efficient re-rendering of components when data gets updated. Okay, React DOM is getting a little bit, I don't want to say in the weeds, but under the hood. The DOM is our document object model, right? So where have we seen the document object model before? When we say document.get element by ID, and then we set the inner HTML in. What React is really efficient at is instead of saying, hey, instead of letting the browser take care of our bridge between our JavaScript and our HTML, React kind of does that under the hood. And it says, hey, because React has complete control over that, when a piece of the data updates, React can control it very efficiently and make only that one little piece of the document object model update instead of dealing with some inefficiencies there. So React Router DOM is kind of the bridge between the two of them. It's like setting up the React to support multiple routes, to support multiple pages. So lots of things going on there. That's probably more in depth than you wanted to know, but sharing it anyway.
Bcrypt, we just learned that.
Bcrypt. A hashing algorithm and NPM package that allows us to encrypt our passwords and store them more securely. Never tell a security person that your stuff is secure. You can tell them it's more secure, but never use the word secure around a security person.
PostgreSQL.
PostgreSQL. I don't know if that's
No, it's
capitalized
it's
properly.
Oh,
What?
I thought we were talking about the pronunciation. I was like, I probably said that wrong.
Oh, no, you were right on that. Most people just call it Postgres, but it is, I think, Postgres SQL. I was right. PostgreSQL, a variant of a SQL database that allows persistent storage.
Beekeeper.
Beekeeper, a database client that allows us to view the data stored in any SQL database. Server.
Salting.
Salting. Really fucking oh no, excuse me. Salting, a encryption technique that prevents users sharing the same password, that prevents a security vulnerability for users sharing the same password, while encryption and hashing do not require salting. It tends to be a good idea. The reason why it's called salting is because we take your password and we literally just sprinkle a little salt on the end of it, right? We take a little tiny random string and we add it in and then we hash it together. And so what that little random string does is prevent two people from using the same security password to have that same exact hash, because we sprinkled a little salt on the end of their password, some random string, and then two people having the exact same password will not have the same hash. And there is something called peppering, but I forget what the definition of it is.
Could you go back to the server? So where did we salt back there, or did we just hash? It's like the salt.
Yes, you were totally right. Bcrypt has salting built in. If you set it to 0 instead of 10, it would not do any salting. Because we set it to 10, it is going to salt the hash 10 times, which adds to the processing time to generate the hash, but also makes it more secure because it's gone through 10 rounds of salting.
It's a lot of salt, man.
I have a question about that, Max, actually, which I just thought about, but I can't find the answer to. Does it rehash, like after you salt it once, does it just continue to add 9 more salts to that, or does it hash it again and then salt it again?
I believe the latter, but that would definitely be covered in the link down in the Bcrypt deep dive. And somewhere in this 40 pages of content, you will probably find your answer.
I've done it before and it's never dawned on me until just now that I don't actually know how the 10 works. I just know that 10.
I mean, in theory, no one knows how hashing works. And because of that, that's what makes it secure. But I feel like I'm pretty sure that once it generates it, it adds another salt to the end of it and rehashes the hash.
That's what I feel like too, because that would be the most secure. If you're just adding random hashes to the same, or random salts to the same hash without rehashing, I feel like it's less secure.
Correct.
Sorry.
What does it mean to rehash?
To take the output of the hash, add another random string to the hash, and then take that and rehash, put it through the hashing algorithm again.
I guess I got
So,
hashing in the first place. Okay.
so
So when
let's just say, as an example here, my say like round 1, 2, 3, and my input is my initial password is like ABC 1, 2, 3. Well, when I generate the hash, I'm going to put a little salt on it, and my salt is, you know, that string. So now the output of the hash is going to be some encrypted thing that we don't recognize. What doing another round of salt is going to do is it's going to take this output, put it as my input, take another random string of letters, add that to the input, and generate a new output. So basically you say, hey, instead of hashing ABC, I'm hashing ABC 1, 2, 3, which is really the input plus the salt, which is this plus this. Excuse me. Concat this, nope. And B2 and C2. And then the same goes for this. So you take this, you put it as the input, you generate a new random salt, then you take the two of them combined and rehash this, which gives you the output. So in theory, when you do the 10, it's, well, not in theory, it actually is generating out 10 different salts and encrypting that through.
And if I was paying attention right, you would use the whole rainbow thing to get the original input.
If you can only use a rainbow table if you don't salt.
Oh, okay.
So a rainbow table would say, hey, we have a bunch of input passwords, right? So we did QWERTY and let me in and, you know, whatever else. And so if you didn't salt it, the one of the requirements of hashing is whatever input you put in will always create the same hash as the output. So what it does is it says, hey, the hash of QWERTY is some random string. And if I am hashing over here with my password QWERTY and I don't solve it, my output is always going to be this. So no matter how many times I have QWERTY in the database, if the hash is okay, whatever, I know that that password is already QWERTY because I already calculated the hash. So it's basically like reverse engineering it. If I hash QWERTY and I see it's equal to this, I can save that in a database. And then when I'm looking in the database, instead of having to calculate all the hashes, I can use the hash that I already know to reverse engineer the password out as QWERTY.
This stuff is pretty cool. Not gonna lie.
Welcome to cybersecurity. Way over my head. All right, last call for any terms so we can let you guys get out of here tonight. If any pop up between now and 5:30 tomorrow, keep a list, write them down. Happy to go through terms, but tomorrow we're going to start at our login endpoint. We're going to write some of our most complicated JavaScript code, but a little relief there. It's all going to be in that one function. We're not really flipping between a bunch of different files. Majority of the file flipping is already done. Once we get the login working, we're going to talk about how we integrate that in the front end, and then how we get our create post to be modified so only admins will be or only logged in users will be able to create a post. All of that said, Don't forget to ruminate in this code, read through things, see if you have any questions before tomorrow's class, ask them at the beginning of class. Otherwise, I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great rest of your night, and I'll see you on Wednesday.